12th day, lower wind month, 1 CE, a rays of magical lighting cast a soft glow that glinted off of armor polished to a mirror sheen. In the highest hall of our winter, the 1st Division of the Imperial Army's 2nd Army Group stood resplendent, row by perfect row. Every soldier faced forward, tilting their heads up slightly to the dais where Jerkniv Runefar Lord Elnix, Lord Protector Paramount of the Baharuth Empire, was seated upon his golden throne. Standing to either side of the throne were 2 of the great Imperial Knights, Count Palatine Buzzywud Peshmal, and Count Palatine Nimblart de Lanok. Immediately below the dais to the Emperor's left were the members of the Imperial Court Council, to his right were the heads of the Imperial Army. A man in the full livery of an Imperial Herald stood at the end of a long carpet leading to the throne's base, a large scroll unfurled in his hands. Captain Wilhelm Ernst Dale Germond. Ha! With a sharp affirmative, Captain Germond stepped out from his place in the front right corner of the 1st Division's 5th Company. The sound of his boots over the gold-veined floor of black marble echoed off of the vaulted architecture of the Imperial Palace. From the galleries above, the eyes of the Imperial nobility scrutinized his every movement as he presented himself before the Emperor. Wilhelm Ernst Dale Germond, the herald's voice rang throughout the hall, "For your valiant service in the Blister campaign, you are to be raised by 1 rank in the peerage and granted the territory of Hohengrunwald. Additionally, you will be granted 200 units of gold and 5 units of treasure." The Emperor grasped a scroll placed atop the silver plate beside the throne and stepped forward. Captain Germond went to a knee and raised both hands while lowering his head. The Emperor placed the scroll in his hands. "Continue to serve long and well, Captain Germond," he said. "By the will of your Imperial Majesty," Captain Germond replied. The captain rose and offered a crisp salute. Light applause filtered from above. Normally, an award like that was rare, but land and treasure were being given away left and right in the wake of the 2nd Army Group's campaign in the Blister. The vast swathe of land had been divided into so many territories that the Court Council had given up trying to give them unique and imaginative names. Not that the recipients were unappreciative. They were quite pleased, in fact. It was infinitely better than serving for a decade and having to compete over a handful of titles slowly carved out over the years. Conquering the domain of an ancient dragon had turned out to be quite the lucrative venture. Mage Officer Rangobard Ekwaera Burbad. The slightest of frowns turned Rangobard's lips as he responded to his name being called. It wasn't that he didn't expect anything, it was just that he had been called out of order. His company had a handful of officers and he was the lowest ranked. Rangobard became painfully sensitive to the gazes of the attendees. There was no doubt they had noticed, as well. He could almost imagine the tendrils of speculation and scheming sprouting all around him. Countless hushed whispers combined to create the rasp of an unsettling wind, breaking him out of worried thoughts. He found himself already standing before the Emperor, and beside the Emperor's arm was a disturbing sight that nearly shattered his mask of aristocratic composure. The expected scroll was there, but beside it was an ornate dagger resting on a blue velvet pillow. Oh, shit. He glanced at the Imperial Herald, who still hadn't started speaking. It was undoubtedly on purpose. He had been wrangled into some sort of show and he had no idea what it was about. Rangobard's eyes shifted back to the Emperor, whose amethyst eyes glittered in an odd mix of amusement and pity. Rangobard Ekwaera Burbad, the herald finally spoke, "For your valiant service in the Blister campaign, you are to be raised by 1 rank in the peerage. Additionally, you will be granted 100 units of gold and 2 units of treasure." Rising 1 rank in the peerage meant that he had gone from an honorary knight to a landed knight, which was expected. The amount of gold and treasure was identical to everyone else who received the same promotion. It was enough to begin developing his new land with, except that the herald hadn't mentioned any territories being granted to him. He kept glancing at the ceremonial dagger, wondering what ludicrous charge awaited him. The Emperor rose, taking the scroll and blade in hand. The herald continued. "You are also hereby promoted to Mage Captain and will be raised by an additional 4 ranks in the peerage. With this will come the territories of Kolberg, Osterhalden, and Brennenthal. A Mage Captain. And did they just give me a damn mountain?" No such rank existed in the Imperial Army, but the Imperial Army's structure was predictable enough to know where things were going. To his surprise, however, it was not the Imperial Herald who delivered the finishing blow. Captain Reburbad. Rangobard genuflected before the Emperor. Your Imperial Majesty? As the first true mage captain of the Baharuth Empire, you are charged with a crucial task, the creation of the first operational war wizard company of the Imperial Army. To aid you in this great venture, you have been reassigned to the 6th Army Group and are now also a member of the Imperial Ministry of Magic's War Magic branch. We expect great things from you, Captain Raburbad. A long pause shrouded the entire audience chamber in stillness as the ceremony's attendees digested the Emperor's words. Then, the silence was broken by a single, familiar voice. "Get fucked, Rangobart," Harlow called. The members of the court council and most of the nobles in the galleries recoiled in affronted disgust at the sergeant's crass interjection. The Imperial Army's leadership and the entire 1st Division of the 2nd Army Group, however, burst into laughter. The Emperor, too, seemed to be silently laughing with them. Someone had just dumped several lifetimes' worth of work on his shoulders. Rangobart was pretty sure he knew who it was. "By the will of your Imperial Majesty," he sighed. "Oh, I'm so proud of you, Rangobart." After the ceremony, Rangobart endured a tearful hug from his mother below the steps to the palace entrance. He wasn't the only one going through the experience. The mothers and sisters of other soldiers did the same while their fathers proudly clapped their sons on the back. They were all commoners, though. Those of noble lineage celebrated in what they considered a more dignified manner, though since they were almost entirely all members of the martial nobility, it didn't look like much at all. In fact, they were simply leaving without a word. "I just wish you'd have worn armor like all the other Imperial Knights," his mother went on. "You would have looked so gallant. War wizards wear robes for official ceremonies, Mother." For that, he was copiously thankful. It took weeks to conduct the award ceremony for the entire 1st Division. They got through a company a day, and he could only pity the Imperial Knights who had to wear plate armor through all of that. Then again, they probably thought nothing of it. "Where's everyone else?" Rangobart asked. "Oh, you know your father. He's nobling with the other nobles. Your brother is with him as well, and Lorelei won't ever let me be seen at your father's side." "I see." He supposed that was to be expected. His father's wife would never allow Rangobart's mother to be seen together with her husband in public, even on an occasion like this. Thinking about it was awkward. Count Raburbad would be happily leveraging Rangobart's achievements, and his wife would have to smile through her husband boasting about the son he fathered through his concubine, while his trueborn son, Lorelei's, stood around listening to it all. Rangobart had no wish to see the result of that equation, so he took his mother's arm and led her away from the palace entrance. "How did you like the Imperial Palace, Mother?" he asked. "It was more wondrous than I ever imagined it would be," she gushed. "There must have been thousands of nobles in the galleries. But there's one thing I couldn't understand." "What's that?" "Everyone around me seemed angry." "Why is that?" asked. Her mother wasn't a noble, so she wasn't educated in the intricacies of the court. Additionally, though Rangobart loved her very much, she was a tad slow in the head. She had become Count Raburbad's concubine purely through her looks, and, since nobles lived in a world where beautiful people abounded, it meant that she was extraordinarily beautiful for a commoner. She was still relatively young, as well, having had Rangobart when she was 14. For better or worse, this meant that Rangobart's father still showed her his favor. She lived a life relatively free of worries, but was also a thorn in the side of Countess Raburbad. Rangobart wasn't sure how long that would last after his unexpected promotion. His father might be taking advantage of his son's achievements for now, but Rangobart wasn't sure at what point he would start viewing that son as a threat. It was almost certain that the Countess would make her move at that point and chase Rangobart's mother out of the household once and for all. "It's because the Emperor is from a martial house," he finally settled on an answer. "The regular nobles are jealous of that relationship." His mother nodded slowly at his words. It was probably simple enough for her to get the gist of things, and it technically wasn't wrong. In addition to the traditional relationship between the Imperial dynasty and Baharuth's martial aristocracy, the Imperial Army was the Emperor's main pillar of support both during the events through which he seized the throne and throughout his highly successful reign. The award ceremonies held for the Imperial Army not only reaffirmed that connection, but also served to ensure that the loyalty of the Imperial Army was the Emperor's alone. The long parade of awards ceremonies in recent times was especially chafing to the civilian nobles. They were forced to watch as thousands of titles and phenomenal amounts of wealth were handed to their martial counterparts, further strengthening the martial aristocracy with the promotion of every new imperial knight. It was already at the point where all the scheming in the world couldn't save the civilian nobles from being trampled under the imperial knights' hooves. Thus, the power of Emperor Jurkhanov had become nigh absolute. General Carbane and his commanders postulated that this was the ultimate objective of the Sorceress Kingdom's orders to subjugate the Blister and push into the southern frontier. A de facto absolute ruler could carry out the mandates of their new overlord much more easily, after all. If one assumed that someone could mastermind the moves in the empire to achieve such far-reaching results, however, one could never truly know if that was the full extent of their schemes. "Is there something in particular that you'd like for dinner, Mother?" Rangobart asked. "Everywhere you've taken me these past few weeks have been wonderful, dear," his mother answered. "I'll happily go wherever you choose. I'm curious about that reward, though. 100 gold coins doesn't seem appropriate for slaying a dragon." 100 units of gold is not 100 gold coins, Mother, Rangobart replied. Well, let's go and take a look, shall we?" They made their way to the Imperial Treasury, which wasn't far from the main palace complex. A small queue of Imperial Knights from the 2nd Army Group's 1st Division, pretty much entirely consisting of the commoner stock that had just been granted honorary knighthoods, stood outside the door. Some were with family, though not many parents and siblings could stray so far from home with tenancies and work to manage. Rangobart joined the end of the line, where he found Harlow standing alone with his hands in his pockets. Somehow, he had found the time to change out of his armor into a semi-formal outfit. "Well," Harlow said, "if it isn't the Lord Mage Captain Viscount. Already pick out a wife?" "Oh, you," Rangobart's mother tittered. "She's my mother," Rangobart told the leering sergeant. Yormo Harlow's mouth snapped shut for a moment. "Damn it all. Wanna trade?" "No." Harlow was over 10 years Rangobart's senior, which made the sergeant close to his mother in age. He could imagine what a trade entailed, not that he wanted to imagine it. "Who is this gentleman, Rangobart?" "Ah, my apologies," Rangobart straightened. "Mother, this is Sergeant Harlow, one of the squad leaders in my company." "Harlow, my mother, Friedlin." "It's a pleasure to meet you, Sir Harlow." "Oh, no, the pleasure's all mine, I assure you." Rangobart considered lighting the man on fire right then and there. Surely he would be forgiven for it, considering the circumstances. "Why are you lined up here, anyway?" Rangobart asked. "Don't tell me you plan to drink all of your prizes away." "Unlike you," Harlow answered, "my ass isn't made out of gold. And I ain't drinking it all away. I need money to buy stuff from the market. Our winter's got all the things. I figured I'd fix up my tent all nice and cozy like Zaradnik's. I thought winter patrols were bad, but those jungle patrols are a whole new level of hell." "What about your new title?" Rangobart asked. "What about it?" He gave Harlow a sour look. Imperial Knights were notoriously bad with money, and it seemed that Harlow was no exception. "You are landed gentry now, Sir Harlow," Rangobart told him. "You don't get an honorary knight's salary anymore. Your fief is your income, and all the land they've been giving out is in that new level of hell that you've discovered. But I get a seneschal from the Imperial administration to handle that, right?" "You do, but you still need resources to develop your land. Money. Also, you're paying that seneschal a salary." Fuck. The jump from a third-class Imperial Knight to a second-class Imperial Knight was a jarring one for the vast majority of the Imperial Army, which was mostly recruited from common stock. In almost every case, the knights who had grown accustomed to having a generous salary saw a drastic drop in their standard of living due to the costs of developing their new titles. Of course, having a title meant having revenues for life so long as they were well managed, which the seneschals dispatched by the Imperial administration were well equipped to do. It was quite the clever scheme on the part of the Imperial administration. Land was commonly seen as wealth, but one had to make that land work to see any revenues from it. This created a dependency on the Imperial administration, plus the newly minted second-class Imperial Knights were driven to perform to earn more honors to get out of the trap they had fallen into. Since those knights were never at risk of being impoverished due to the work of their seneschals, they took it as a challenge or goal rather than a hardship. "Hey, Lord Mage Captain Viscount." "What? And stop calling me that." "Lend me some money." "No, Oh, come on. You got 3 territories. And did you hear the names of those territories? It's a mountain, the mountainside, and a valley below the mountain that sounds like it's on fire. And it's all in the blister. I bet my Lord Father would bankrupt the house trying to develop even a quarter of it. He wouldn't fall victim to the same pitfall that the commoners did, so the Emperor had just shoved him into it and laughed along with everyone else. A vague sense of dread accompanied Rangobard when he thought about finally learning the details of his new title and position. One got by on their merits in the Baharuth Empire, and some sick, twisted fellow had decided that this also meant that merit could be induced. Sure, Harlow said, but what does that have to do with me? Rangobard pointed a finger at Harlow. Harlow dove into a nearby hedge. He didn't reappear. Is what you talked about going to be trouble? Rangobard's mother asked worriedly. It's nothing to worry about, Mother, Rangobard answered. I'll figure something out. His mother's good humor returned. When it came their turn at the front desk, Rangobard placed his scroll on the counter. Shall we have everything delivered to your principal residence, Captain? The clerk asked. Yes, please, Rangobard answered. May I review the delivery? Of course. This way, sir. They were led into a side office where they bid to wait. Several minutes later, 5 trolleys were rolled into the room by the Treasury staff. The clerk came in behind them, cradling a chest in both arms. I believe you were interested in these? The clerk said. Yes, thank you, Rangobard replied. He hadn't been, but now that the chest was in front of him, he was curious what the treasures were. The clerk had probably made the assumption since most Imperial Knights knew what a unit of gold was. Once the staff left Rangobard to his inspection, his mother came around the table to gape at the gold units. It would have been easier if they had put this all on one trolley. They are gold ingots, Mother. The trolleys would collapse under the weight if they were loaded with any more than what you see. Rather than trying to deal with all of the different coinage that the Imperial Army came across, it was all melted down into gold units and redistributed as part of the rewards and honors system. In the case of the Viridian Dragon Lord's Horde, it also prevented a sudden influx of coins from wreaking havoc with the Empire's economy. The Empire, of course, kept its share of the loot, and they were bound to use it to fund a vast array of government projects. Rangobard lifted the lid of his treasure chest, revealing a pair of items carefully laid on a silk-clad cushion. A unit of treasure was an item that fell within a set range of value that could qualify as an heirloom or display piece in a noble's gallery. In Rangobard's case, he had been awarded a rod and a necklace, which he graced with a long frown. Just how far do they have to stick their noses into my business? The rod was fashioned from a creamy, iridescent material and capped with a black pearl the size of his fist. He stretched his hand over the item. Appraisal magic item. Looks like the rod itself is fashioned from pearl, too. It's magic, but nothing unknown. Well, the Ministry of Magic would have taken it for study, if so. Rangobard inspected the necklace, but it was entirely mundane despite its exquisite appearance. He balefully eyed the rubies dripping off of the intricate silver chain. The treasures awarded to him were obnoxiously clear in their meaning. The rod was the work of the Imperial Army, meant to serve as the symbol of his new position as a mage captain. He would have preferred it if they had given him something less gaudy, even if it meant that it wasn't worth as much. The ruby necklace, on the other hand, was the court council telling him to go find a wife, or at least someone with whom to sire heirs to his new title. With his reassignment to the 6th Army Group, he supposed it was a practical consideration in addition to being a matter of the establishment's expectations. Too nosy by far. He knew that the court council was right, but he possessed little desire to go looking for a wife. Especially considering the recent episode that his father had put him through. Mother, Rangobard held up the necklace between his hands. What do you think? His mother gasped and came over. It's beautiful. Then it's yours. Truly? She looked up at him, wide-eyed. Truly. It's the least I can do for you as your son. Tears welled up in her mother's sapphire blue eyes. Oh, Rangobard, you're such a dear. I haven't received anything like this in ages. His mother turned around and lifted her hair to expose her nape. A troubled expression haunted Rangobard's face as he helped her put on his gift. He had been away from home for so long that he had fallen out of touch with the affairs of House Reburbad. It seemed that his mother's time in the household would be ending sooner than he thought. The next morning, Before the award ceremony continued, Rangobart went to the Imperial Army complex to report into the 6th Army Group's headquarters. As the rumor suggested, it was busier than ever and officers rushed from building to building on one errand or the other. Upon speaking to the officer at the main office's front desk, he was sent straight to the top floor of the building. There, he found the all-too-familiar figure of General Ray, who looked almost exactly as the most recent deluge of propaganda posters portrayed him. Rangobart strode up to the general's desk and offered a crisp salute. Major Captain Reburbad, reporting in, sir. The general looked up from his paperwork with a raised eyebrow. You are not due to report in for a while yet, Captain Reburbad. Yes, sir. I just thought I'd come in to see what this was all about. Is that so? Well, I suppose the Emperor did keep things vague. His Imperial Majesty just loves toying around with the nobility like that. General Ray leaned to the side, retrieving a binder from a shelf along the wall. It landed on the desk between them with a thud that shook the stone floor. Your assignment. Rangobart tested the weight of the imposing object before picking it up and leafing through its contents. He didn't even need to see any names to confirm his suspicions about who was responsible for his promotion. Her telltale manner was all over the magic-related portions of the assignment. Sir, he said, have you ever thought that enemies from the Academy might plague you for your entire career? I don't see why that wouldn't be the case, General Ray replied. It's one of the intended outcomes of the institution, after all. In your case, however, I figured you had a friend in high places, not an enemy. Yes, well, I suppose it's just like her to make it seem that way. Either way, this is your duty to carry out. Can you do it, or not? I can't promise that it will be as pretty as this trebuchet round describes, sir. General Ray snorted. That's how it always is, he told him. Everything's made to appeal to the bureaucracy. The people in the field just have to deal with all of the troublesome details that they gloss over. In that case, Rangobart said, it can be accomplished, eventually. Even then, however, it's something that must continually evolve to keep up with the times. I'm glad to see your head's already in the right place, Reburbad, the general nodded. I hope you can survive what's coming. May I ask what's coming, sir? The general leaned back in his stiff wooden seat, enclosing Rangobart within his measuring gaze. It's almost over, Reburbad. The generations-long process of imperial reform. The Empire is ready to become a true empire. What does the Sorceress Kingdom have to say about that? General Ray shrugged. As far as I can tell, they've been expediting things. Testing us. Profiling our character as a nation. I read the reports on the Blister campaign and I saw that you were attached to Zarodnik. Do you understand what she was doing? No, sir. Not in the way that you appear to be asking about. I only got bits and pieces. I see. Well, you'll get a lot more of those bits and pieces once you formally begin your duties with the 6th Army Group. Before that time comes, I strongly recommend that you get all of your affairs in order. First day, Upper Fire Month, 1 CE. After weeks of attending awards ceremonies, Rangobart was finally free to attend to the business that he couldn't take care of in our winter. This, of course, was also where his personal troubles conveniently began. Please take good care of your health, Rangobart. I will, Mother. If you run into any undead, don't try to be a hero. Just run away. Yes, Mother. Make sure you check that any nice girls you encounter aren't actually vampires. I'm not going there for that, Mother. His mother dabbed her cheeks, sniffled, and then blew her nose into her handkerchief. She waved him a tearful farewell as his carriage slowly rolled out of the grounds of House Reburbad's manor in the first-class district of our winter. Rangobart had been tempted to just bring his mother along for various reasons, but his father forbade it. You coddle that woman too much, Rangobart. Can't we just let her have her moment, Alander? The heir apparent of House Reburbad snorted. She's been having her moments since we set foot in our winter. You're going to give her heirs? I very much doubt that. His mother had more than ample opportunity to develop heirs during the flower of her youth when she commanded Count Reburbad's full attention. Yet, she never did. Rangobart's mother was a simple woman who was content with being content. It didn't take much to make her happy and she rarely, if ever, asked for anything. The carriage jounced as it crossed the threshold of the estate. From there, It went on to join a procession of carriages belonging to House Raborbad's allies. Let's take a look at that letter of introduction again. Rangobot held in a sigh and reached into his coat pocket. His eldest brother scrutinized the thing for what felt like the 100th time. If Baroness Zaradnik's letter of introduction could be described in a word, it would be standard. Yet, Rangobot's father and brother, they wouldn't tell their allies about the letter, endlessly scrutinized it as if it contained a myriad of hidden meanings. Knowing the Baroness, it didn't, but, then again, even General Ray insisted that the young noblewoman from the Sorceress Kingdom was much more than she seemed to be. I don't see why you're so skittish, Rangobot said. The faction as a whole received its own invitation, didn't it? Yes, which makes your letter's very existence suspicious. The truth of the matter was that Baroness Zaradnik had written the letter as a sort of consolation prize for Rangobot's failure to court her, hoping that it would mollify Rangobot's father somewhat. And it did, at least until Rangobot had received his unprecedented promotion. Most would probably wonder why his father would see it as a bad thing, especially since House Raborbad had poured so many resources into raising Rangobot to be a useful tool and went to great lengths to facilitate the advancement of his career. The answer lay in that very same thought. He was supposed to be a tool for House Raborbad, and a tool was a tool because they were obliged to do their owner's bidding. Being raised from honorary knight to viscount was rising too far and too fast. He was now more obliged to the Emperor than House Raborbad, and an upstanding noble of the Empire couldn't trust that. In his father's eyes, Rangobot had gone from being a tool of House Raborbad to a tool stolen from House Raborbad by the Emperor. The notion took a few weeks to slowly sink in, but, when it did, his father started thinking. Rangobot was the son of a concubine, but he was still his father's son. Now that he was the bloody Emperor's creature, every obstacle to Rangobot's succession might mysteriously meet with unfortunate ends. The Emperor had stolen House Raborbad's tool, now the tool might steal House Raborbad itself as a part of the Emperor's relentless effort to reduce the power of the civilian aristocracy. Due to this, a pair of powerful bodyguards, workers, as far as Rangobot could tell, accompanied Arlander wherever he went. His brother was sitting between them at that very moment. His family's fears had spawned several other conspiracy theories, and some of them were not in any way amusing. For the time being, however, the aforementioned one was Rangobot's current headache. Arlander tossed the letter of introduction onto Rangobot's lap. "This mage captain thing," he said, "what more did you find out about it?" "It's as you've heard His Imperial Majesty say, esteemed brother," Rangobot replied. "I'm to form a company of war wizards for the Imperial Army." "Come, now, brother," Arlander said, "you must have uncovered some details, by now. For what purpose will it be employed? Why? How will it work? You are the mage captain, are you not?" "Yes, that's right, and I've told you that I don't have any details yet. I've been attending the First Division's award ceremony for the last 3 weeks. Look, if you want to go and dig up some deep, dark secrets, why not go and bother House Gran?" His brother's eyes slid from window to window as if he expected a member of the notorious house to suddenly fly into the carriage. At least it shut him up. In reality, the Emperor had been vague about the details of the mage captain's position because the Emperor had no idea what the mage captain was supposed to do, and neither did the mage captain. As General Ray said, a certain someone had packaged a non-existent thing in a shiny wrapper for the bureaucracy, and the bureaucracy decided that they wanted it. Of course, War Wizard Company sounded mighty impressive to the Imperial Army, and so they wanted it, too. The Emperor and his court council weren't fools, of course. They understood that it could exist, and so approved of the War Wizard Company proposal, which was itself proposed by a certain member of the Imperial Court Council. If Rangobot succeeded, it would earn the Baharuth Empire a great deal of regional renown and add an unprecedented amount of military power to the Imperial Army. That was probably the greatest downside of having recently conquered a dragon's domain and having money to burn as a result. It turned even geniuses into gamblers. Thus, Rangobot Raborbad had been tasked to create a thing that didn't exist. The binder that General Ray had provided him was more of a resource compiled for his convenience than an assignment with specific orders and objectives. Their carriage sped up as they crossed into the threshold of the fourth-class district. Rangobot watched the slums whiz by, but then an odd scene caused him to raise his hand to knock on the driver window. "Stop the carriage." "Rangobot," Arlander tensed. "What are you?" The carriage lurched to a halt. Rangobart threw open the door and stepped out to look back up the road. I wasn't seeing things. 2 squads of Imperial Knights from the 1st Army Group had gathered at one of the intersections the carriage had passed. This was strange in itself, as our winter's security forces pretty much never patrolled the slums. In the rundown buildings all around them, residents watched whatever was going on from the shadows of their windows. Rangobart. Orlando called out from the carriage, "What are you doing? It's dangerous to stop here." Dangerous with 2 squads of the best Imperial Knights standing right there? Give me a break. He jogged up to the gathering, more curious than wary. One of the patrolmen glanced at him before returning his attention to the street. "What's going on here?" Rangobart asked. "Do you need any help?" "That's a very good question," one of the Imperial Knights answered. "What kind of answer is that?" He looked into the narrow street and quickly spotted the source of everyone's consternation at the head of the line of wagons squeezed into the passage. "A goblin?" Rangobart frowned. Why was there a goblin in the capital? More importantly, why wasn't it already dead? He peered at the thing in confusion, trying to figure out what was stopping the Imperial Knights. As he did so, his confusion was dispelled when he spotted someone he knew standing a bit further up the street. Nemel? The familiar figure turned. Gay. Rangobart. His former classmate's presence explained why the Imperial Knights weren't doing anything about the goblin. It was probably from the Sorceress Kingdom and they feared that our winter would be flattened if they did anything to it. "Is that any way to greet an old acquaintance?" Rangobart asked. "I'd rather not greet you at all." Rangobart sidled past the cordon of Imperial Knights and walked past the goblin by the wagon. Nemel took a step back, eyeing him warily. "If you touch me," she said, "I'll bite you." "Have you gone feral?" Had the youngest daughter of House Grant spiraled into some strange form of tribal savagery since moving to the Sorceress Kingdom? Baroness Aradnik certainly didn't act like that. Maybe he could tame her with a potato. "No," Nemel replied, "but I can hardly blow you up in the street. It would cause trouble for the residents." "Nemel, the last wagon is being loaded, if it isn't the Viscount." Lady Gran appeared from behind Nemel. What was a noblewoman doing in the slums? No, Nemel was a noblewoman as well, so there were 2. "Baroness Gran," Rangobart lowered his head slightly, "your presence here is unexpected. Isn't it?" The Baroness smiled a smiley smile that looked just like her daughter's. "Today's the big move, so I thought I'd come and help organize things." "The big move?" Rangobart examined the line of wagons. The street was barely wide enough to fit them and the sun couldn't reach the pavement. Now that his eyes were adjusted to the gloom, however, he noted that the wagons were filled with passengers and cargo. By the looks of them, they were denizens of our winter's slums. "I'm afraid I don't follow, my lady," Rangobart said. "They're the first batch of migrants accepted by our placement agency here." Nemel gestured at a nearby storefront. "They'll be settling in the territory that I've been managing in the Sorceress Kingdom." He followed Nemel's gesture to a building with boarded windows and a closed door. The only thing that distinguished it from its neighbors was a relatively fresh-looking sign with Eternal Winter Placement Agency written ominously in bold upon it. Across the street was the familiar facade of a death bread. If they added a few more establishments like them to the area, everyone would probably think the street was cursed. "I'm surprised you managed to get as many people as you have," Rangobart said. "It was difficult getting anyone at all at the start," Nemel admitted. "Not only are most people averse to moving to the Sorceress Kingdom, but there were some unexpected things we had to watch out for, too." "Such as?" "Debts," Nemel replied. "Runaways. People with problematic histories. I'd like nothing better than to give everyone a fair chance at a fresh start, but we also have to think of the people who have worked hard to build everything up so far." Rangobart nodded. If he understood it correctly, Nemel was managing a frontier territory. The damage a single criminal caused could potentially wipe out an entire population under those circumstances. "What's the story with that goblin over there?" "You mean Nob?" "He's Nob. Put that down. It's dirty." Everyone, from the goblin to the migrants to the Imperial Knights, jumped at the sound of a voice that was better suited for a battlefield. Nemel cringed and her head turned back and forth while she made apologetic gestures. "Sorry about that," she said. "Nob's from our village. He wanted to come and see what our winter was like, so I figured why not?" "You have goblins in your village?" "Yeah. It's actually more like we're living in a goblin village these days. There are 50 goblins for every human we've brought in. Anyway, it's about time we get going. We have a long journey ahead of us. Just a moment, Nemel, Lady Gran said. Your father and I put together a little something for you. The Baroness produced a lacquered wooden casket roughly a half-meter to a side from the magical container at her hip. You shouldn't have, Nemel said. Nonsense, Nemel. You were agonizing over what industries to promote in the village, and the family business is the obvious choice. Rangobart watched Nemel and her mother from where he stood to the side. House Gran truly existed in another world. Their notorious reputation as a house impervious to the machinations of even the greatest imperial factions, it was said that even the emperor didn't dare touch them. Aside, many little things about House Gran slipped past the notice of the imperial aristocracy and the public at large. That, or those little things, were offhandedly rationalized away as unimportant or expected details. As Nemel's classmate in the Imperial Magic Academy and a wizard who served in the Imperial Army, however, many things stood out to Rangobart about House Gran that he couldn't quite piece together. The interaction before him offered a window into what they considered normal. As renowned as the Empire was for its magical integration, everyday Imperial citizens still did not discuss magic-related topics on the street. They certainly didn't casually pass magic items between one another in the narrow, filthy streets of the capital's slums. Lady Gran was adorned in magic items from head to toe, putting even the most well-equipped war wizards in the Imperial Army to shame. Yet, most people assumed that her outfit was no different from any other noblewoman's, so naturally did she wear it. Rumor amongst the Imperial Army's war wizards had it that if one were to perform a magical inspection on Lady Gran, they would find no fewer than a dozen slender ones armed with third-tier spells neatly holstered in the ribbing of her corset, giving her enough firepower to single-handedly destroy an entire army division, assuming it just stood around to get blasted to bits. That was the other thing about them. Their magic item workshop concealed the fact that they appeared to be descended from an ancient lineage of war wizards. Few people realized this because most members of House Gran spent their time innocuously imbuing wooden sticks with magical death for other people to use instead of personally flinging those same spells around on the battlefield. Given the fact that roughly 1 in 5 wands employed by the Imperial Army came from House Gran's workshop, Rangobart had to wonder how many millions of lives they were indirectly responsible for ending since the founding of the Baharuth Empire. People were terrified of House Gran for good reason, but not nearly terrified enough. Of course, when one suggested anything remotely to the tune of the above, the members of House Gran would assert that they were harmless. Normal. Everyone knew that was a lie. House Gran's existence stood apart from the average imperial house. They weren't regular aristocrats, neither did they fit into the ranks of the Empire's martial elite with its venerable cavalry traditions. Magocrat was the best way to describe them, perhaps something akin to the imperial arcanists proposed in Fundamental Principles of Magocratic Governance. Most would point out that they weren't the only nobles who were also mages in the Empire. Every senior member of the Imperial Ministry of Magic had been granted a title, and there were more than a few scions who had graduated from the Imperial Magic Academy with arcane training. Except, while that was indeed the case, they couldn't remotely be compared. The department heads of the Imperial Ministry of Magic were simply mages who had been granted noble titles. They didn't care about them beyond the fact that they provided revenue to subsidize their research, leaving the senescals supplied by the Imperial administration to manage their fief's affairs. Something similar could be said about most of the graduates from the Imperial Magic Academy's magic stream. Magic was a convenient tool to be used, considered separate from everything else. Indeed, saying that they were anything like House Gran was like claiming that a civilian noble who sported a rapier on their belt as a fashion statement was a martial aristocrat who could personally crush hundreds of enemies at once in battle. The members of House Gran were both nobles and wizards at the same time, and both aspects were intertwined and inseparable. Magic was so integrated into their existence that Rangobart had no choice but to believe the ongoing back and forth between Nemel and Lady Gran was no different from any similar interaction between a mother and her daughter, except with magic. Wait a minute. Isn't this what I've been looking for? He had a feeling that it was. Nemel, he said. My party is on its way to the Sorceress Kingdom, as well. You and your group are welcome to join us. His former classmate peered at him suspiciously. Lady Gran put on a sly look. That's a wonderful idea, my lord, the Baroness smiled. Mother. Don't be shy, Nemel, Lady Gran continued beaming. It only makes sense. Nemel's sigh made Rangobart want to sigh as well. She didn't have to act as if she had just been saddled with a burden. Fine. I hope your party doesn't cause my people any trouble. The trip to the border is long enough as it is. I doubt they'll come anywhere close to them, Rangobart replied, especially with a goblin around. That was the way it usually went. Travelers going in the same direction combined into larger caravans more often than not. Regular people did so for safety, entertainment, and convenience. Merchants did it to share information and ply their wares. Nobles allowed it out of a sense of duty as members of the establishment. The larger a caravan became, the livelier things got. If they were lucky, they would be able to attract several bards. Don't get me started on that, Nemel grumbled. Do you know how many times a patrol stopped us and asked, do you realize that a goblin is driving one of your wagons, Mom? Well, you can't exactly blame them for it. I can. Rangobart snorted. Nemel had gotten quite feisty in the time since he had last seen her. Maybe she had picked up a bit of frontier spirit. He fell into step beside their lead wagon as they rolled out onto the main road. When they reached his brother's parked carriage, he found a footman at each corner looking like they were expecting a rogue to descend from a nearby window with daggers brandished. Their tension shot up by 5 notches when they noticed the goblin coming their way. Rangobart, Orlando stuck his head out of the carriage window. What in the world possessed you two? His brother withdrew his head with a gasp and the window slammed shut. Rangobart tested the door, half expecting it to be locked, but it swung open without resistance. Orlando was on the far side of the cabin, taking refuge behind his bodyguards as he fingered the dagger at his waist. Lord Orlando, Rangobart said, if I'm not mistaken, you've seen a goblin before. That was at an exhibition match in the Grand Arena. Let's move on, this entire area is dangerous. Goblins in our winter's streets, what is this world coming to? Where's the rest of our entourage? Rangobart asked. They must have surely noticed that we stopped. They are probably waiting for us somewhere sane. After fighting a small war in the blister, goblins and the impoverished hardly seemed like murderous threats. Admittedly, he held the same views as his brother before joining the Imperial Army. I see, Rangobart said. Well, I'll be catching up with an acquaintance from the academy. Enjoy your ride, esteemed brother. He jogged to catch up with the lead wagon of Nemel's party. Nemel gave him an unwelcoming look. What are you doing? She asked. I just thought I'd spend some time catching up with you, Rangobart answered. There were also a few things I wanted to ask. About what? I'm sure you know about my new appointment. It would be hard not to. It's probably one of the top 3 conversation topics in the circles of the Imperial elite. I can't get through a single dinner party without someone bringing it up. What's it all about? I don't know. Nemel frowned down at him from her seat. You don't know? It's a wizard company, right? As in a company of Imperial Knights, except wizards. That's what the court council and Imperial Army chiefs would like, Rangobart replied. But, well, you know what it's like to be a war wizard in the Imperial Army. Culture eats strategy for breakfast, huh? Rangobart nodded. As expected, Nemel immediately understood the problem. One did not just simply throw together 100 wizards and call it a company. It didn't even work that way for regular Imperial Knights. The Imperial Army was built on generations of martial tradition, which not only dictated its identity, but also the practices, standards, direction, and development of the army down to each individual Imperial Knight. While the Imperial Army did try to incorporate wizards wherever it could afford to, they were ultimately treated as auxiliaries and attached to companies as mostly independent officers. Every company had a different wizard, and every wizard did things differently. Sticking 100 such independent, eccentric, and willful individuals together was guaranteed to be a calamity. Rangobart suspected that this was precisely why the Imperial Army hadn't tried to create a war wizard company until now. If they had, the results were probably buried so deeply that no one would be able to find out what an embarrassing disaster it was. I guess the Empire really doesn't have anything similar, Nemel said. Even the Imperial Ministry of Magic is, well, chaos? It's more like anarchy, isn't it? Nemel said, Everyone has their own project, so resources are divided in several dozen different directions, no one communicates, and everyone's locked themselves into their own little worlds. Which is no way to run a unit in the Imperial Army, Rangobart said. Even the Imperial Magic Academy was like that, now that I think about it. Classes covered basic theory and application, then everyone had their own little projects to be evaluated. And the scores were useless, Nemel grinned. One proctor would decide your work was brilliant, the other would tell you it was a waste of time and you should have focused on what they were personally interested in, while another never showed up to grade you because they were too busy doing their own thing. I think the only thing the academy could actually score us on was whether we could cast magic under pressure during the promotional examination. In a nutshell, that was what the highest echelons of arcanistry in the Baharuth Empire were like, and the Empire didn't care so long as practical results were produced. Rangobart's father often called the Imperial Ministry of Magic and its affiliates a bottomless pit into which a tenth of the Empire's finances vanished. The Prez wrote that treatise of hers for a reason, Nemel said, and then her grin widened. Oh, I suppose she's the one who put you up to this. I bet she's going to be bullying you until you're old and grey. Rangobart sighed. As a whole, Nemel seemed to be one of the only people who understood what was going on. What do you think I should do? Me? Nemel leaned away from him with a frown. Why would you ask me about that? I'm not sure if you realize this, Rangobart told her, but House Grand possesses the only unbroken lineage of war wizards in the Empire. We are not war wizards, Nemel replied. Well, I was, but that was a short-term thing. Yeah? Then what do you call it when you load ones with fireball and lightning spells day after day? Working. I'll have you know that my parents didn't approve of me joining the Imperial Air Service. Isn't your sister basically a bodyguard? She's a maid. That's a completely normal career for a noblewoman. That much was true, but he didn't know of any other maid who could fry people to a crisp with electrospheres. What I was getting at was that your family seems to have normalized what it is to be a wizard. In a good way. Before this war wizard company can even think about flying around roasting the enemies of the Empire, they're going to have to get everything else in order first. I don't disagree with that line of thinking, Nemel said, but would the Imperial Army even notice? I bet they're thinking of something like an Imperial Air Wing turning an entire battlefield into a sea of flames, Nemel said. Does all of this consideration even matter to them? Or will they be satisfied with 100 random war wizards raining fireballs on their enemies? I'm pretty sure the head court wizard just threw together his disciples if they were needed for something and they took turns blasting whatever it was apart. Nemel, Rangobart said, I know you don't think very highly of me, but I'm trying to do my job seriously here. You're probably right about the Empire largely only caring about getting the results that they want and expect, but, believe it or not, that part doesn't matter to me. What I care about is creating a real home for the Imperial Army's war wizards, just like how the Imperial Knights have theirs. Nemel remained silent as the caravan filtered through Winter's western gate. The Imperial Night patrols shadowing their progress visibly relaxed once they were out in the countryside and on their way. Fine, Nemel finally said. I don't mind discussing your work with you, but I hope you're not expecting anything exciting.